The league meetings are here in Minnesota, which means we get wonderful media personalities like the Monday morning quarterbacks, Albert Breer. And, the owners have been chit-chatting. They've been having their meetings, voting, things like that. What was the most compelling storyline that you took away out of league meetings here in Minnesota?
I think most people tell you the push play. I'm just kind of sick of talking about it, to be honest with you.
We can talk about something
else.
So,
I mean, that obviously, the proposed ban got voted down. They needed 24 votes. They got 22. I think it's compelling what happened in the room, and the temperature was sort of turned up there with the owners. There's that. I think, to me, the most impactful thing that was discussed. Well, there are two things. I think the Olympic flag football thing is interesting because obviously, they had Justin over there to talk about that and what that's going to look like 3 years from now. To me, the playoff reseeding is the most interesting one. And Detroit had proposed, and obviously the Vikings were a part of all of this last year, winning 14 games and winding up as the number 5 seed, to have open seeding. And I think a lot of people looked at it as a fairness thing, and that's not really totally what it was. It was more about the owners trying to find a way to make games in week 17 and week 18 more compelling because you have more and more teams that are managing their rosters down the stretch. So that didn't have anywhere close to the support to pass this time. And they only had a handful of teams supporting it at the league meeting in March. But now I think we're at the point where it's this is going to be a real discussion point. And so, the Lions withdraw their proposal, but there's a good, healthy conversation in the room, and it feels to me like everything's on the table. They could look at the scheduling formula, they could look at different ways to seed. They're going to be continuing, I think, to look at this, and to me, the eventual going to 18 games could wind up being a flashpoint.
Interesting. I mean, it is very interesting how the schedule is always this moving object that there has not been a way to figure out exactly how to do it. Is that something that you believe is part of the competition committee's goal, just to find the perfect formula?
I mean, I don't hate the way it's done now, and I'm saying that again, standing in the building of a team that won 14 games last year was the number 5 seed, but I do think the environment that a team is competing in is not the same from team to team, and because you aren't playing 82 games like they do in basketball or 162 games the way they do in baseball, there are a lot of inequities that exist in the scheduling. You only play 14 teams every year. You only play 10 teams in your conference every year, so every team is going to have a different environment that they're operating in versus what a team in another division might. So, I think that's the big thing for me is I looked at the NFC this year, and the NFC East, they play the NFC North and the AFC West, and that's 6 playoff teams in those two divisions. The NFC West plays the 2 South divisions, which there's only two teams that made the playoffs in those two divisions, and so if an NFC East team wins 11 games, that might be more impressive than an NFC West team winning 13. So that's the sort of discussion that I think needs to be had here, because again, it's not like other sports, and the inequities in the schedule I think certainly make it so you do want to reward a team for winning the division because those other 3 teams in the division are competing in the same environment as you are.
Well, let's talk about that schedule. The back-to-back international games for the Vikings. For the first time ever, a team is doing that in 2 separate countries. And you look at the strength of schedule for this team. What stuck out to you when you look at the 17-game schedule? Yeah,
I mean, definitely the double in London turn I think got everybody's attention, and the fact that they're doing that. And that the Vikings were a willing partner on that. I do think, and I said this when the schedule came out, that there are some built-in advantages there. And one of them is in a year when you're playing 8 home games and 9 road games, you can essentially say with 2 neutral sites now, you're actually playing 8 and 7. Also, the fact that those Cleveland, Pittsburgh games could have landed later in the year in Ohio, in Pennsylvania.
With outdoor stadiums.
You'd be talking about being in the elements.
Right.
And then I think there's also some intrinsic benefit in having your team away for 10 days. Now that can go both ways, you know what I mean? But I think with the culture they've been here and with Kevin being in his 4th year, I do think having an idea of how to build that into a benefit for everybody is something too. So certainly that stuck out. Going to Chicago early in the year stuck out. It's hard when you're looking at 32 different team schedules to pick out things that stick out about every single team, but I say those are a couple of things that stuck out about the Vikings schedule.
We haven't spoken, I don't think, since free agency, which has
Yep.
been a while. A lot has happened since then because they also had the draft, obviously. When you look at the moves that this front office made, what are some things that stick out to you?
I mean, I think the obvious, which is getting stronger and tougher up the middle and on both sides of the ball. And I thought, being able to go out and get Ryan Kelly and Will Fries and Jonathan Allen, and then, I think a lot of teams would say, okay, like we're good, we've taken care of that, but they doubled down on it in the draft, and going and taking Donovan Jackson where they did in the first round. I think it sort of shows you, like, okay, like what happened against the Rams in the first round of the playoffs, we're not going to let that happen again. And so I think, being in that sort of position where, you really are putting so many resources into getting certain parts of the roster right. I think that's important. And I think that piece of it to me is really kind of like where you probably would be going anyway, just because you've got a young quarterback starting for the first time. You want to be strong in the running game, and finding a way to create a running game with Aaron Jones obviously back, like finding a way to create a running game where you're going to have J.J. McCarthy in 2nd and 6 and 3rd and 2 more often is really important. And I think they've done that with what they've been able to do with their offensive line.
All right, I'm going to give you one.
And obviously part of it, of course, is like Christian Darrisaw getting healthy.
Oh, for sure,
too.
yeah. It's been great to see him around these hallways still. One more question before I let you get going. This meetings marks the 20th anniversary that the Wolf family purchased the Vikings. It's been an amazing 20 years for everyone here in Minnesota, having them as the ownership. But from an NFL perspective, a league-wide perspective, what do you think their impact has been on the league itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're part of like a new wave of owners that really has invested back in their team. And I think look around and kind of what's been built here, and obviously the stadium is a part of it too. And and I think like a lot of different ownership groups, like I think they went through a lot to kind of figure out, okay, what do we want to be, what do we want to look like, and I do think like you see kind of an organizational culture here, and I think it's shown in like what Kevin's been able to do, and with Kwesi as the GM the last few years, and also like being able to win with different quarterbacks. Like you won with Kirk Cousins, you won with Sam Darnold, and now I think you're positioning yourself to win with J.J. McCarthy. That doesn't just happen, like, so I do think some of the investments that they've made back into the organization, and like I think that's a real impact, and I think you're going to see it around the facility today. I know some of the owners are coming through here to take a look at the facility. That guys who are building their own facilities in other cities, like they've done some things that I think have been innovative and have sort of set the pace for some other teams in the way they're building their teams.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Enjoy your time here in Minnesota.
All right, thank you.